All right, welcome everybody. It looks like we are live. Just checking on some of the settings right here. All right, welcome everybody. My name's Scott Maier. This is Drawing Together with Artists Network, here where we meet every Wednesday to draw together. This is what we're working on today, this drawing of this tropical waterfall. It's very cold here in Colorado, and I need to put myself somewhere else. So this is what we're doing today, and I'm very excited about it. Excuse me there. And so this is done in charcoal. There was a question earlier about whether or not this would work well in tinted charcoal, and I think it would. I actually tried it in tinted charcoal, and I just wasn't feeling it for whatever reason, but I think it would work great for this actually. So if you do have some tinted charcoal, I think it would be really fun to give that a shot. I'd love to see your work. So you'll see a link pinned to the top of the discussion thread here to the page where you can share all your work with us at Artist Network. If you have any questions, feel free to call it out in the chat. I love to hear from everybody. I also like to hear your approach to it, how you might be doing it differently, what questions you might have, where you might be struggling, where you might have some suggestions for me. So everything's on the table in terms of discussion. If you want to follow along, the link to the video is found in the description below. So you're just going to copy and paste that into the browser, and you should be able to draw along with us. Or some of you like to just watch and then follow along later. So this does go up as a recording later. I saw some great drawings. This portrait from last week, this one right behind me, that was a tricky one, but I saw some really fantastic drawings. So nice work, everybody. I think one of the things that really kind of grabbed my attention for this was that sense of atmosphere, the way the light in the sky is really dominant, and it's almost like the landscape emerges out of that light. And then within that, the big challenge here, and I think the element that stood out most to me, was the idea of abstract mark making. There's so much going on in here with the foliage, with the water, that it's really easy to kind of fall into the trap of trying to draw every leaf, draw every kind of crack in the rock. And for this one, I really want to kind of embrace, just like I said, the abstract mark making. It's let the materials do what they do and try to suggest the subject as much as possible. And so I just had a lot of fun just kind of going for it. And I'm going to try to replicate that again in this one here. So that's where I'm going with this. You may all have, like I said, a different take on it. This is the Strathmore, it's not, I'm sorry, not Strathmore, it's the Legion Stonehenge white. So this is the really nice rag paper that I like to use. Now it does hold the charcoal, pretty well, and so I want to be careful. I really want to let that sky be bright here, so I'm going to do my best to kind of preserve that. For the charcoal, I'm keeping it simple with some vine charcoal. I've got a 6B and this is a 2B charcoal pencil that I'm using, so relatively hard as well as a soft one. I'm going to be most of my drawing is going to be using the medium one here. I've got my trusty blending stump that I love to make marks with, and then a variety of erasers. So I've got this retractable one from Derwent that you can see I've kind of shaved down to this chisel tip. I've got my Mono Zero eraser by Tombow, and I've got my Kneaded eraser, and I have a larger rubber eraser on hand as well, so I may use that. And just a paper towel to kind of rub things down when I need to. So I need to be a little bit more careful. We've talked about this a lot. I tend to get kind of my oily fingerprints all over the paper, and I'm going to try to avoid that today. So we'll see. So I just want to shout out to everybody. Welcome. I love seeing all the familiar names here. I've been hearing from some of you through email, and it's awesome to see how communities are kind of forming outside of this, people getting together to share their drawing experiences outside of the live event. So that's really awesome. Love seeing everybody from around the world. Like I said, go for it in the discussion thread. I love to hear your observations, your thoughts. Share what you're thinking about in terms of drawing here. That's why we're drawing together. Okay, trying to get my head in the game here. I want to make some adjustments. It feels like the audio is peaking a little bit. If there are any technical issues, just hang on. Generally they get resolved as we go, so let's get to it. I'm going to start with the vine charcoal And I've got the kind of the larger image up here on my left, and I've got the smaller one in front of me, so I can kind of see the overhead projection right in front of me. So I can, it gives me the effect of stepping back from it. And what I want to do is try to rough in the basic proportions here, but I'm going to be a little bit more mindful. You may have seen me do in previous drawings is kind of tone the whole paper. And like I said, I want to try to preserve more of the white because this will really hold that vine charcoal. I'll never be able to get it to that white, bright white again. So I'm not going to be too precious with it, but if I can at this point preserve some of that white ahead of time, that would be good. I don't have to worry about that here in the kind of the ground plane, because even the whitest whites are darker in value than the sky. So I can be a little bit less kind of protective down in here. So I'm just using the side of the vine charcoal and trying to establish kind of the rough placement of the objects. And so at this stage, I'm really utilizing, I'm looking at everything through blurred vision here. And before I make the mark, though, I'm doing marks. I'm trying to do a quick check-in with where I'm at. So I'm a little bit more deliberate at this stage than I might otherwise be. You know, I'm generally just kind of reacting to it, getting information on the page, and then once it's on the page, we'll adjust. But there's part of what's happening now is I'm calculating before I make the marks, how far over, how far up am I? I'm starting to leave a space where the waterfall is going to be. So is that feeling roughly correct? And so we talk about that a lot in this series, is that so much of the drawing is about is paying attention to where our attention is. So we're maybe making marks, you know, we're kind of working on one aspect of the drawing, but we're putting our awareness on others. And I'm kind of building up, since I know this is going to be kind of, I want to kind of protect with as the white of the page a bit more. I'm kind of starting from the bottom, kind of working my way up to find the lines. And now I'm starting to think about the positive and negative space as well. So positive space being the, you know, the object that I'm drawing, negative space being the shape of the space around that object. I'm just using, I should be using my paper towel since I have it in my hand here. It's kind of, oh shoot. No! I just broke my pencil tip. I hate that. All right, how did I do here? My 2B is all right, but I think I'll have to sharpen it a little bit. So this is a good opportunity. Some of you have asked me questions about how I sharpen the pencil. I'm going to protect the drawing here, but I'll actually go through the process now. I like to use a razor blade, as you can see. And I just, it helps if this is sharp. So that was a good learning experience there. I've done that so many times lately. I just, I just threw all my materials off the table. But one of the things that I notice, you know, with the charcoal, you know, so if you start sharpening your pencils this way, you'll notice is like kind of a bit of an adhesive that kind of binds the wood casing to the core of the charcoal, and that can kind of gum things up a little bit, and that it's often kind of confronting that where the charcoal will break. Sometimes that, you know, if the pencil is kind of strained or stressed in some ways, sometimes that inner core can break, and it's already kind of broken inside that casing. And so if you find that yourself kind of trying to sharpen your pencil this way and it's constantly breaking, I wouldn't worry too much about it. You just try to be gentle with it. And so as I'm kind of scraping, I'm kind of rolling this in my fingers to kind of round it out. Let's see. I'm gonna leave the end blunt here because that corner edge there is actually pretty sharp, and so I can get some details if I need them there. Otherwise, I'm actually going to sharpen on the page when I draw later on. I'm going to leave the 6B off of here for now, and then get back to the drawing. Daisy, I'm glad you enjoyed when I laugh at myself, because that's the only thing I can do, because it's I need to keep drawing, and if I get consumed by the embarrassment of it all, then the drawing would never progress. So it is what it is. As part of the drawing process is this, sometimes it's like the little things like that that can really kind of consume the whole drawing experience. So just like how you have your everything set up, you know, what the lighting is or something, you know, sometimes it's like little things that can have a big impact on the whole drawing process. So in this case, I was not being very careful when I was wiping this off. I just knocked everything off the table. So all right, so as I build up, the hill line is going to be kind of critical. So I need to do a little bit of angle sighting. So I'm holding in my mind right now the shape of that negative space, the shape of the sky, in scale relative to everything else. And I need to get a sense of the angle that I want to kind of rough that in. I'm going to use the side of the pencil, or the charcoal. And I'm being really light with this. It's barely touching the paper. And so as I try to locate the top of that hill, one of the things I'm seeing is that it's directly above kind of the left side of that water. And so if this is placed correctly, then that'll help me place that. So I'm doing a kind of a quick check-in. Let me see, I'm going to do some comparative measuring. So let me see, this should equal that. So there's this tree line here. This line, this edge here, so it should perfectly divide that space, which it does. So I'm gonna lock this in. I'm gonna say that's gonna stay the left side of that waterfall. And then as I draw a plumb line up, the peak of this hill is going to be right in line with that, and then that'll help me to indicate the rest of that hill. And one of the things I'm seeing is an issue with the negative space up here. There's too much space here, so that might mean I need to bring everything up a little bit. So what I'm going to first do is kind of indicate that hill line there, and you can see that I'm using the angle of the stick, kind of placing it along the path that I want, and then just dragging down to avoid using a line there. All right, hello from everybody. Yeah, it's a charcoal pencil, Cheryl. That's what I'm using today, is this Generals. I really like the Generals charcoal pencil, so I'm going to use the 2B. I think that's kind of my favorite. It's kind of my go-to. Because it's really versatile. It can get dark enough when I need it, but it's also hard enough to give me a little bit more control. All right, so now that I have everything kind of blocked in, I feel like everything's a little bit too low, so I'm going to bring this up. So if I look down here, for example, there's just not enough space for that water line. So I'm going to bring that up a little bit. Bring the kind of the top rim of the waterfall right around here. I'm going to leave this line where it belongs, or where it is. And indicate this kind of rock in the foreground there. So keeping things really loose, but at the same time, it's this balance between being loose and being kind of precise and in control, deliberate with the marks. And this is where, I'd be kind of curious to see how you are all approaching it. This isn't necessarily a show designed to have everybody draw like this, but so if you're confronted by this subject, how might you approach it differently than I am? So here with the foliage up in the upper right-hand corner, you get these sky holes that I don't want to eliminate. I'm going to try to just suggest them a little bit. So I'm being really sensitive here, and I can use the tooth of the paper to actually help suggest some of that, some of the detail on there. I'm trying to roughen the angle of the tree trunks and branches up in here. Cubs Win asking, do I ever do watercolor demonstration? I do not. I've certainly worked in watercolor, but that stuff's hard. And I would need to practice it a bit more before I do that. Although I am looking at potentially doing some oil painting. That's really more my wheelhouse. And it's mostly, developing the fundamental techniques of watercolor that I need to practice before I can, a lot of what happens in that practice is not just learning how to control it, but then also trying to determine how to articulate what's happening and kind of describe things in a way that could be helpful to other people. So that's what I would need a bit more practice with. All right, so now I feel more confident in the general structure here, and kind of going back to that idea of what does it mean to think abstractly. And I hear a lot of artists kind of talk about that. Especially when you're working with representational kind of subject matter, when you're drawing realistically, for example, you may hear artists describe certain abstract qualities of the work, but that can be kind of confusing. And I know it took me a while to really understand what that means. But really, what it comes down for me, the way I interpret that is that every work of art you do is an abstraction of some sort. We're taking a subject that's elsewhere, whether it's from life or from photograph, and we're translating it through these materials onto the page, into this two-dimensional surface, using these materials that are just kind of smudged and just kind of all over the place on the paper. If it's oil, if it's oil paint, we're just taking dirt, right? colored dirt and oil, and we're arranging it in a specific way on the page. And we just happen to be arranging it in a way that aligns with what we're observing when we're drawing from life. So when we're thinking abstractly in representational work, what we're doing is we're maintaining a focus on shape, line, texture, form, the abstract qualities of simply moving the materials around, but in such a way that it triggers something in the viewer's mind, and then the viewer's mind fills in the rest. Our brains are designed to make sense of information. We're kind of pattern recognition machines, and so when you work abstractly, we're just trying to leverage that a little bit more. So you take these abstract marks, but we're trying to arrange them in such a way that it triggers something in the viewer's mind, and it triggers the right thing in the viewer's mind, so that then they recognize it as, in this case, a tropical waterfall. So in this case, we're going to be making all sorts of scribbles and random marks on the page, but hopefully in such a way that it activates that part of the viewer's vision center, and instead of just seeing marks on the page, they see the waterfall. They engage their mind to see the subject matter. So, all right. I want to kind of indicate a little bit here in the flow of the waterfall here, but I want to be kind of careful with that. So there's some gaps where the water seems to be separating. Before I place them, I want to kind of orient myself. So I'm kind of doing a quick check-in with other aspects of the landscape to make sure that I'm kind of oriented properly. And there's this particular shape right in here. And I find that with charcoal, you can get by with a lot when you're just kind of tapping the page. Just making a few little quick taps on the page can take you a long way in suggesting a certain form. So I try to, in this case, I'm trying not to be too heavy-handed, so I'm relying on that, just a really light touch on the page. So this is really just using the weight of the pencil, or the charcoal. But I'd be curious to see how you all kind of interpret, what abstractions are in representational work. If that's something that you've either been challenged by or, is integrate or you think about a lot in your own work. Let's see. Just want to check out, I see some questions coming through, so I'm taking a little bit of break here. So right now I'm working with, this is still just the vine charcoal, so I haven't switched to the charcoal pencil, but I'll probably just be working with the 2B. Cheryl is saying drawing is a key to all of it. I'd be curious to hear more on that. And see kind of see if we can expand that thought a bit more. Drawing is I don't know how many of you have been with me since the beginning, but I remember kind of starting off the series, kind of asking everyone to kind of contemplate what the word drawing actually means, right? And I think we kind of talked about that in a previous episode recently as well. The idea that drawing is used to describe actions other than making marks on a paper. It generally means to pull out, like we're drawing water from a well or names from a hat, things like that. And to make sense of things, like drawing conclusions. Means to pull together. All right, so this is starting to come together, and my approach to drawing is to try to get at the heart of the subject quickly, and then be in control of how much that's refined. And so now from this image, hopefully we can look at this and there's something in the arrangement of the forms that, again, this is all in abstraction, but hopefully there's something in this arrangement that triggers the viewer to say, oh, that looks like a waterfall, right? And get a sense for that place. And so for some of you, that may simply be enough. Maybe we don't go beyond this. And for others, you may need a lot more detail. But that's where kind of an individual preference kind of comes into play. But the idea is that it's really now from this foundation, it's a matter of embracing that and kind of digging into the fundamental forms, the arrangement of light and dark, the direction of the marks, texture, things like that. So what I'm doing right now is my priority is on quickly identifying the shape and the placement of the dark forms, kind of the shadow forms. And if you squint your eyes, if you're having trouble seeing the abstraction, try blurring your vision, so squinting your eyes, and try to eliminate any sort of the detail. This is where in that book, Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain, they might say flip it upside down. You're changing your association with the subject, and so it's no longer you're no longer driven by those preconceived notions about how something should look or be drawn or what it looks like. And instead, you're just seeing it as an abstract arrangement of forms and shapes. So, Sina is asking, what pencil do I use right now? I'll be using, this is a General's charcoal pencil. This is a 2B. I have a 6B that I broke earlier, so I may bring that out and sharpen it again. But there is a list of materials, as Sylvia is saying, in the description below, so you'll find that. And then if you need to purchase materials, you can go to the Drawing Together page on Artist Network. And there's a link to all the materials that I recommend. You can purchase them at Blick. So and just kind of try to make it easy for everybody by organizing them in one kind of list. And so for me, drawing gets really exciting when it becomes more simple rather than more kind of detailed. It's like, how much can you get away with, right? That's kind of the challenge that I try to embrace, is like, if I look at this, how much more detail do I need to really identify this place, and how simple can I make it, and what does that relationship look like? What is the balance there? And a lot of times too, drawing is, it's about defining the experience I want to have for that moment. Some days I just want to be more controlled. Some days I want to be more loose and expressive. And some days I may be feeling scattered and I need to bring myself more focus and control, so I intentionally become more controlled in the work. And some days I'm feeling like I'm just too precise in my thinking and I need to loosen up, so kind of intentionally challenge that. All right, so I'm feeling pretty good about this overall layout with the vine charcoal, so I can start to make things a bit more permanent now using the 2B pencil. I'm going to start though by cleaning things up with the eraser. Since this is going to be kind of the focal point for me, I want to define this shape a little bit more. But you can kind of see it's not fully pulling up the charcoal, which is why I wanted to preserve the sky area a little bit more, rather than tone the whole page like I did before. And because I want to create that sense of light, essentially backlit, the sky being brighter and kind of flooding through this river valley, I want to create a really soft edge along there. All right, that is art not... It's coming together so quickly. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, this is coming together more quickly than the preparatory one that I did. And so again, somebody asked about the use of tinted charcoal for this, and I think it would be great. I did give it a shot initially, but I decided not to do it purely out of me trying to connect again with the drawing experience that I wanted to have. I realized that I just wanted to push the charcoal around a little bit more, and that tinted charcoal is a little bit harder, and it kind of commands more precision than I really wanted to at that time. I wanted to really just kind of move things around, so hopefully that makes sense. Let me think, what am I doing here? I need to... essentially I'm using the charcoal pencil to block in some of these forms kind of lightly and make a little bit more permanent some of the dark marks that I've laid down with the vine charcoal, which is going to be very kind of light, fugitive. It's going to kind of wipe away more easily. So this just kind of blocks in some of these dark values a little bit more. And now and it also allows me an opportunity to sharpen my pencil a little bit. And so I'm using the side of the pencil in this overhand grip, rolling at my fingers so that it's not developing in these flat spots. And I'm just essentially just laying down a layer of this compressed charcoal to replace the vine charcoal, to give something that's a little bit more permanent. But I kind of, I think about, we were talking earlier about kind of being in control of how much detail you put into it. One thing I noticed about myself is that, there's a natural tendency to want to overstate, and it's very similar to like, writing an essay or something like that, where, so much of the writing process is about trying to figure out what not to write. You write more and then you edit it back and you say, I don't need this, I don't need that. But there's an initial attempt, initial kind of instinct for me at least that doesn't trust that that what I need to convey can be conveyed in relatively few words. And so that can sometimes drive that impulse in drawing, just to say, I need more detail. The viewer needs it, and I found that over time that is often not the case. The viewer actually doesn't quite need as much detail as we sometimes need, as we think they need. So, think about that a lot with, thinking about like television resolutions, right? How sharp and crisp everything is. But, growing up in the 80s, I remember watching movies and stuff on this really old tiny screen, and it was all grainy, and it was still a good movie, right? We didn't need all those details. It's nice having them, but we didn't need them. Our brain kind of filled in the rest there. All right. Hello, everybody. If you're new, welcome. This is Drawing Together. My name's Scott Maier, and we're the Artist Network. So we're just a community of artists come together because we like to make art. All right. So I think I have enough charcoal, compressed charcoal laid down that now I can bring out the blending stump. I want to do some more drawing with the blending stump, I think. So this is an old one. I've been using this a lot, but it's for maintaining a nice point. You can see how much charcoal is loaded onto it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of work from the center of the form outward while I get a feel for like how intense those marks are going to be, because this can be a little bit unpredictable. And some of you have asked, well, how do you draw with the blending stump, or if I have any tips on it. And one of the things that I've mentioned before is that every tool you have available to you, blending stump, an eraser, the charcoal, it's all an opportunity to contribute to the form. And you're always drawing, and this isn't just a tool for blending out marks. You can make marks with these as well. One of the challenges, like I said, is that it's really difficult to control how much charcoal this is going to pick up and deposit elsewhere. I like to have mine loaded with charcoal, but as you kind of work the drawing, it's going to be laying down charcoal. It's going to kind of clean itself, and it could be picking up more. And so sometimes I'll be drawing and it'll just leave this heavy dark mark, or sometimes I'll be really kind of laying in on it and it's not making any mark at all. And it does take a little bit of practice, but this is why I kind of like to start in the center of the form and get a feel for how this particular stick is kind of performing today. And I'm trying to think in terms of shape, not line, as I follow, especially along this path. I want that to be kind of really falling into the light. So as I look at the subject with kind of blurred vision, I'm trying to see the general shape of the lights and darks, and then just try to recreate that shape using the side of the pencil so that it kind of encourages me to work in shape, and I don't get consumed by the desire to create these kind of fine lines. And then what I like about drawing with the blending stump is that it allows me to sneak up on the values a little bit more. You see that laid down darker than I wanted it to, or than I was anticipating, because I rolled it and I kind of encountered a kind of a fresh piece of the blending stump. So I'm just kind of looking back and forth between the reference image and my drawing, trying to, when I look at the reference image, what I'm thinking about there is, what is that shape? And then try to quickly visualize what kind of motion do I need to make in order to achieve that shape? Is it a horizontal? Is it vertical? Is it kind of diamond shape or rectangular, circular, that kind of thing? And I'm quickly rehearsing it in my mind. And then when I come to the paper, my main focus is on where I am relative to everything else, right? So in my mind, I've kind of anticipated what that mark should be, and then I looked at the page to make sure I'm in the right spot before I execute on that mark, if that makes sense. Marn's art. Love using charcoal for drawing. I'm a self-taught artist and love watching and learning your techniques. All right, well, thank you for sharing that. Welcome. Maier is saying the shadow pattern on the right side appears to have a vanishing point. Oh, that's interesting. Are you kind of curious to learn more? Are you talking about kind of down here on this lower point where we could start to see the edge of that rock cliff? Or you see, does it also include some of the foliage shadow patterns? Huh. That's a really interesting observation. And I think when I get to that site, I might try to ask you for more kind of thoughts on that. It's interesting. Yeah, I kind of, if you're thinking along the ways that I think you're thinking, I kind of do that as well, as I start to, in these more organic forms, try to visualize a more rigid perspective system being applied to that. Looking for vanishing points, orthogonals, things like that. And so you can see along this edge, it's all about determining where that path is, and rather than draw a line along that path, I'm placing the blending stump on that path and then just kind of dragging down, and that allows me to create that edge without having to draw a line. And in the end, that's going to lead to something that feels more organic. And then as part of this kind of approach too is really just observing what's happening on the page and then building from there. And then you're kind of in control of how much you need to force your drawing to be driven by the reference photo versus driven by what's happening on the page. And that's kind of an approach that overlaps with kind of abstract painting or abstract mark making, the idea of kind of reacting to the way the materials are moving and some sort of just kind of natural mark making. Yeah, because sometimes I'll make a mark and I'm like, oh my God, it makes it look like light shining off of such and such a subject, or whether maybe it's foliage like this. It doesn't look exactly like the reference, but I really like the fact that it triggers something in my mind that says that is light reflecting off of a rock or a tree or something, and then maybe let that becomes the driving force in the drawing, rather than going back and trying to force it to become more like the reference. I'm just kind of embracing whatever is naturally happening on the page. And then sometimes something exciting might be happening on the page, but it's not really working with regards to the reference. So this is too dark up in here, but I'm going to come back and adjust that. These aren't, this is all about kind of building this up, and we're going to adjust as we go. I'm just kind of pointing out some things that I'm thinking as I navigate the drawing. So I'm going to kind of change the direction of my marks here in hopes that will help me to differentiate between the trees that overhang the cliff and then really that vertical wall that forms that cliff there. Hello, hello, everybody. New people coming to viewing in. If you haven't chimed in, if you haven't let us know where you're viewing from, I'd love to hear it. Yeah, we get people from all over the world, which is really cool. Like I said, I've been hearing from some of you. Margot, you just emailed recently, and it's cool to hear that there's communities forming. So some of you meet outside of the class here to share drawing experiences, and that's exactly, couldn't ask for anything better. Like I said, for me, this isn't about people learning to draw like I do, but hopefully that we're all learning to draw together and we discover something in our own work, our own process. And part of that discovery can be inspired by simply trying something in a new way. That's what we do as artists so much, is we intentionally challenge ourselves. So part of what I'm thinking along in here is trying to identify the planes, the broad planes, like the vertical face of the wall, the way that it kind of angles in a little bit at the top here, and then as we come down this side here, what's happening, and just kind of building in some value here with the blending stump. And I can feel it's already starting to kind of dry out a little bit. It's I don't have quite as much charcoal on it now as I had before. This edge here is a little bit harsh, so I'm going to soften this a little bit. But yeah, you can see that recognition is still there, like it's starting slowly coming together, adding a little bit more detail. I kind of just like again, kind of the abstract arrangement of shapes here. In particular, the way this corner gets cut off, yet this one kind of mirrors. You get that kind of a parallel path here. So this was one that we have to get over, and then this line kind of carries us around to this wall, and then we have this tree line that carries us back. So they have like a two-dimensional kind of design interest as well as a three-dimensional thing. That's something I remember learning when studying Cezanne, whose focus on that was kind of pronounced. That kind of blew my mind when I heard that as a possibility. He would, simultaneously be thinking about how to create a two-dimensional design on the canvas, then how to use color and shape to also create a dimensional cycle. You're moving back into space and then forward along into the foreground. All right, let's see. I want to be really sensitive here as I kind of indicate more of the darks along in here. And I kind of need to just feel out the materials a bit. So I'm going to play around with pushing these marks up as well as dragging them down, and to see what that's doing. This is an area where I find myself, there's an instinct right now to just start drawing lines that represent water falling, right? and I'm really trying to overcome that, and so I'm going to kind of force myself to make one mark at a time, but I want those marks to be right. Again, what I like about this blending stump is it creates these softer marks, allowing me to kind of test it a little bit. And then if I need to darken it, I can always do that. But I can kind of sneak up on the forms a little bit. And it creates these marks that feel just a little bit softer, and it really helps with creating the suggestion of light. Hello from Romania, Azerbaijan, holy smokes, people from all over the place. All right, thank you everybody. Have you ever used the charcoal sticks? Monica's asking. Yes, I actually have some of the compressed charcoal sticks right here. And that's all, it's funny, I used to draw with that all the time. And I don't know why that shifted for me. Is that something that you draw with as well, or? Kind of curious if everybody's kind of using similar materials, if you're trying something new or working with different materials. Okay, so as I come down in here, what I'm trying to avoid is this instinct to just make these evenly spaced, kind of regular marks. I noticed that I have a natural rhythm to my mark making that sometimes works, but sometimes it doesn't. And in this case, I need to be careful. I want these to be kind of irregular. That's going to make this feel more natural. And I'm really trying to study the nature of the edges in the waterfall. So as the water is falling down from the top to the bottom, what is happening along that edge that gives us a clue as to kind of the volume of water, the how like how concentrated kind of the stream is, the movement of it. This photograph kind of froze this in time, but I think we can also kind of project something about what it would be like to be there in person and kind of capturing that. And that's why I'm working from photographs. It's best to work from life whenever possible, but because I can't go there now like I want to, I have to rely on the photograph, and there's still a lot that I can learn, but I'm trying to put myself in that place of being on location. If I was here right now, what would I be doing, and how would it affect my mark making? Monica, so you have them, but you haven't used them. I give it a shot. Oh my gosh, it's kind of funny how I've gotten into this rut with my drawing, and I just naturally picking up the pencils now rather than using the charcoal sticks. But when I did a lot of drawing, especially in college, I used primarily the charcoal sticks. I really liked. So, okay. Let's see here. What am I doing now? Let me get some sort of indication of this tree. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to visualize the average shape. There is kind of there's a play of light and shadow along the top of that tree. And I'm going to try to average it out essentially as a single value, and then I'm going to drop the value in the shadow area. So I'm kind of just creating these light marks and trying to see the simple overall form of that tree, and not get lost in the complexity of it all. I would get a lot of questions from students about this. How do you manage, foliage, right? And how do you draw all the leaves? Well, you don't. Again, the viewer's mind, our minds are designed to make sense of stuff, and we're constantly filling in information. And so we're just activating that part. And if we create the right shape and the right value, and we kind of utilize the natural textures of the paper and the material, that can be enough to kind of jumpstart the viewer's mind into filling in the rest of the information. So that's kind of what we're doing here. And it's one of the reasons why I try to avoid drawing lines, is because we interpret lines differently than when we interpret shapes. When we see lines, our brain automatically goes to that place that is trying to understand those as divisions, individual elements. So a line is a symbol for the edge of a shape. It differentiates between the ending of one form and the starting of another. And if there's too many lines, it can just be confusing, because then the brain is just seeing it as a random assortment of these individual shapes rather than pieces of one shape. We're trying to see the whole tree, not the leaves. And we can invent the individual leaves if we understand the shape of the tree properly. But if we overdraw the leaves, we can't sometimes see the whole tree, right? It's interesting how it works that way. Simplifying forms is really can be a very powerful tool. All right, I want to take a break, see if there's any other questions here. Rain Sky, I think that landscapes are the most difficult part of pencil drawing. It's easier with watercolor technique. I admire your talent. All right, well, thank you. That's interesting. I'm kind of curious. For me, drawing landscapes is so much easier because, partly because I draw a lot more than I work with materials, but like as a subject matter, it's so much more forgiving than some of the other subjects. I've talked about that before with portraits and such. Oh man, those really intimidate me. And with landscapes, it allows me just to kind of be free and expressive with the marks, and again, I can kind of suggest things. But everybody has a kind of a different relationship with drawing, so I'm really glad that you shared that. That's what we're here to do. Okay, so it's starting to come together more. I'm kind of just trying to move all around the drawing. It's about kind of striking and moving on, striking in another spot, and then moving on to the next one, and not getting bogged down. And in part because I've learned, at least for me, the more I focus on an area, the more it distorts in my mind. I need to kind of just make a quick interpretation, move to another area, and I may come back to that, and I may kind of work on this tree in various times throughout the drawing. But for me, it's most effective to kind of work a little bit, move to another area, and then come back to it, rather than just stay and fix and work on that area. I just kind of lose my objectivity that way when I do that. All right, Cynthia, thank you for the comments there. Interesting, okay. Lisa, welcome. Glad you could join us. There are materials in the description below, but it doesn't indicate what paper I'm using. So this is what I'm using here. This is the Legion Stonehenge White. I love this. This is a cotton rag paper. It does hold the material pretty well, but I love the tooth of it. It just creates this kind of velvety kind of surface, which I really enjoy. And it really grabs the material. So I kind of protected this area a little bit so that I don't have to kind of erase that out. All right. What am I going to do now? Let's see. I think what I need to do is I'm going to need to now continue to refine the dark areas here. So much of what really conveys the texture is actually getting the shapes of the darks correct. So now I'm going to switch to this overhand grip. I hold the pencil in a lot of different ways, right? So you have your tripod grip here, which we use when we write. I don't often draw with that. This is just a straight overhand grip. And then I'll often do some kind of modified grip where it's kind of stabilized in my fingers, and then I get more control by using my fingertips. And then with this, you can see how I kind of have it wedged in my fingers here. It allows me to use the side of the pencil, but it's just a little bit, it's trying to balance precision with kind of looseness. I don't want lines. I want really kind of naturally formed marks. And so what I can do is I can kind of roll the pencil in my fingers as I draw, and I want the paper, the material just to kind of skip across the surface. So what I'm thinking about most is I'm trying to visualize the overall shape of the darks, and then I'm trying to visualize the direction and the flow of the texture in that area. So in this case, those leaves are kind of cascading down. So I kind of want to drag the pencil in that direction, that motion. And I'm just letting it kind of scrape across the surface. And then if you play around with how you rock the pencil, it'll either give you more precision by engaging the tip there, or it's going to create a broader, kind of more expressive mark as you kind of lean back on it. So that's kind of what I'm doing here, and I want to be open to the materials making interesting marks at this stage. So this is kind of experimenting, and then the experience of drawing, I've drawn enough to know that if I experiment in a certain way, it could potentially lead to success in the drawing. So it can be intimidating to try to think of experimenting with your marks, but I think the more you do, you'll find that there can sometimes be just a wider range of marks available than you may have anticipated, and especially if you're accustomed to drawing using this tripod grip, you're really limited in terms of the marks you make. You basically get a line, right? And then you can build that line up into a shape or a tone. You can use cross-hatching and things like that, but it's all built on that line. What I'm looking for are marks that are undefinable, so that you don't look at it and say that's a line or a shape or hatching. You're just like, that's a dark mark, and once you do that, that's the abstract nature I was talking about earlier, where the viewer's mind will naturally try to make sense of that, and will start to visualize light and shadow, texture, things like that. So hopefully that makes sense. That's just, I'm trying to articulate things that I naturally, kind of, it'll let play out on the paper. It's all a visual thing, but trying to put words to it is a little challenging. But you can see with the tooth of the paper, if you kind of scrape the materials along it, it naturally suggests foliage in a really interesting way. So again, I'm looking for the shapes of light and dark, but then also thinking about direction, and then just observing to see, well, what's happening on the page. So just trying to block in the larger shadow areas. some of this is getting cropped off over here. So I'm going to try to not spend too much time on this right side. And I forgot to mention, as you're working on the dark areas, and you're trying to visualize, say, this shape here, also do a quick check-in where you are relative to other aspects of the drawing. So in this case, we have a strong line here, and so I can kind of check in and see, well, where am I relative to that? And it's really worth it to do that frequently to keep everything aligned properly. Mary D. Lake, or Marty Lake, when I use the stump, it is flattening everything there, the tooth of the paper. That's a good point. So the blending stump will fill in the tooth of the paper. And so you can see that it did that here. But then you can layer on additional material to kind of reestablish the tooth. And then if you need to, you can simply use your kneaded eraser and kind of pull things out that way. So you can kind of gain that and you can work with that tooth. And what I found is to be most effective is to build up, if you know, like in this area here, I know that the lightest lights are going to be darker than that. So I'm not too worried about protecting those crevices in the tooth of the paper. I want to fill those in because actually what would happen is I build up the darks here. If I see little white flecks caused from the tooth of the paper, it's going to flatten everything out. It's creating a little bit too much contrast. So I'm going to knock that down, then build up the darks, and then I can erase out the highlights a little bit more later. So hopefully that makes sense. That if we go, like I said, if we go straight to utilizing the tooth of the paper, often those little white flecks are just actually a little too bright. So so hopefully that makes sense. All right, so I'm going to come across here. And this is a bit more of a kind of a painterly approach. I think a lot of what I'm doing here comes out of my experience painting the landscape, doing a lot of plein air painting, and that's kind of one of the main purposes of this show for me is to practice drawing to help boost my skills when working on location. And so there is a part of my brain right now that's thinking, like, if this was a brush, what would I be doing? If I had color, what might I be mixing? And I think that going back, was it Romero that had that comment about perspective? You can start to see some lines of perspective. You have this dark line here. As you come up, there's a crevice here. You come up here and you can start to see these kind of ridges in the shadow, almost like it's leading to a vanishing point, somewhere right around here. I see some, right now I'm observing some kind of ferns that come out of the shadows here, and I'm not going to be worried about those. I'm going to use my eraser to kind of extract those a little bit later. But kind of getting back to using the blending stump and the tooth of the paper, like I said, the blending stump will fill that in, but I think you can establish it by continuing to layer on more charcoal. So right now I'm still mostly blurred in my vision. Again, what that helps to detach myself from trying to define these objects and thinking, oh, I'm drawing leaves right now or rock, things like that. Just trying to observe the abstract shapes and forms. Again, that's kind of the primary objective for this one for me is to kind of embrace the abstract and then try to understand what that means. How's everybody else doing? Are your drawings coming together? Okay, hello from Southeast Pennsylvania. Welcome. Gracie, welcome. Waterfalls are fun to draw and paint. I'm really enjoying it. I haven't done a whole lot of them. We'll get some here in Colorado. Painted some kind of flowing water in some of the rivers here, but never really done a massive waterfall. So I'm just kind of coming in here again, thinking about looking for the shapes of the darks. And as I work towards the edge of the water, I want to be kind of gentle with it. I don't want a hard line to be here. So I'm kind of softening as I go right up to that edge. So again, thinking about the overall shape and then how I might change the direction of my mark to align with the flow of the texture. And don't forget too, as you're working here, we're constantly calibrating values in our mind. So, this area here originally was dark, and over time we start to assign it kind of greater contrast than it may actually have. We start to again calibrate our understanding of value to that dark. We see the darkest dark, and we start to assign it as black. And then when you can go darker, then it changes that context of that, and now it may read completely differently. But I like the way it's starting to feel like that space is kind of bathed in the light. Again, one of the main things that attracted me to this image was this idea of the backlit sky filling this valley and kind of being a substantive presence in the drawing, in the subject. So as I move up in here, I'm feeling kind of a horizontal kind of thrust to the texture here. So I'm trying to observe this kind of triangular shape of dark, but I'm also trying to then use the direction of my marks to reflect that kind of horizontal pull, or it kind of you get kind of this bowing sensation there. And then as we come into this shadow, now there's kind of a vertical kind of emphasis there. You see those ferns that are kind of falling along that cliff face. So even though it's all kind of a continuation of that shape, I'm going to change the direction of my marks. And they may end up just getting consumed in that dark area, but if they do become visible, then if anything, it'll just help me with that texture. So Brenna, welcome. I'm glad that you joined us. You didn't mean to click on it, but I am glad you joined us. I love it when people accidentally stumble into this series here. That's what it's all about. So if you are new, this is Drawing Together. My name's Scott Maier, and I'm a producer at Artist Network, so I make instructional videos, and I do this as well. The purpose of this show is to simply for us all to get together and draw. So each week we choose a new subject, kind of work in a different medium, and we just kind of get together and draw, share our experiences. I can answer questions if you have any. Everybody here can answer them too. There's some that I don't answer. I don't know how the answer to, but then you all come in and are able to fill that. So it's all about building a community of artists. All right. I think what I need to do is I'm going to take the paper towel and kind of knock things down a little bit. And one of the things that we talked about, if you're new, you wouldn't have heard me say this before, but one of the things I like to focus on is that balance between variety and unity. It's one of the design fundamentals is, with the idea that the more harmony and unity between your elements, the more comforting it can be. The more diversity, the more contrast, the more exciting, right? And so if you have something that is, basically the most unified you can get is to start with a white piece of paper, right? That's it. Like there's no division at all. With each mark you make, you're creating some sort of contrast. You're creating a division on the page that becomes exciting for the viewer. If there's too much contrast, we can sometimes it becomes too fractured and the viewer has a hard time really kind of understanding it. It becomes dissonant. Like it's kind of like music where you have too many instruments all playing different things, right? And it can become it can kind of push you away from that, less attractive. And then if you have too much unity, then it can be boring. So what we're trying to do is find that balance. And so one of the things I think about is I use this paper towel to help unify things. As I feel like things are separating, they're popping off the page, then I might come in with the paper towel and unify it, kind of knock everything down, wipe it all together, and that visually ties it all together. So that's kind of my thinking there. And I think sometimes I know for me, when I was first starting out, I put too much emphasis on variety. Just things weren't unified enough, and so I was kind of taught and shown a process that I'm using here that kind of starts from a place of unity, and then you're kind of gradually creating contrast and pushing and pulling things. So rather than starting by drawing a line, I'm starting by establishing shapes, and then I'll build lines into it. I'm just kind of going through and kind of lightly indicating some of these darker areas along this hillside here. I'm still just using the side of the pencil. So you can see now I got rid of that blunt end that I had before because I'm using that sharp edge. It's Real Creative. Welcome. Didn't mean to join. I just wanted to know how to draw eyes, and this must have come after my video. We actually have a couple episodes. I don't remember which ones they are, but drawing eyes if you want to. But welcome. I'm glad that you clicked on this. And then it says it's increasingly looking like an oriental landscape. Yeah, it's interesting. I wonder where this. I don't know where this photo was taken. Kind of reminds me of Hawaii. I don't know if it is there or if it's someplace in South America. All right, I'm kind of just using my palm to knock that down. All right, what do I need to do now? All right, I think what I need to do is now I really need to start refining. So what am I going to do? That's the question I have. I'm going to leave this the way it is for now. I feel like it sufficiently pushes back. It has enough detail so that we can register it as trees. As I come forward though, I feel like this is ambiguous. So I need to give a little bit more clarity to that. So I'm going to bring out my blending stump. And I'm doing this, you can see I'm not actually making very many marks. But I don't really know what needs to happen. So I'm trying to make marks to see if it sparks something that needs to happen to make this all come together. And I think what I need to do is, I think I need to use the eraser. So I'm going to pull out my kneaded eraser. I like the kneaded eraser for this because you can shape it into all sorts of irregular things. So it lends itself to creating kind of more organic looking forms. And you can see that I'm reshaping that as I go to avoid an impulse to create kind of like a stamp essentially that gets repeated. What I'm trying to do is observe the general shape of the light striking off the trees and kind of go with that. And I'm changing up the shape so that it's kind of like a new tool in my hand every time I reshape it. So very similar to how I was thinking with the charcoal. Again, what I said earlier is that every material you have is an opportunity to contribute to the form. So an eraser isn't just a tool to make corrections. In this case, I'm actually drawing the light shapes. And And so it kind of shifts the thinking a little bit. It plays with your understanding of additive and subtractive drawing. And I'm just kind of picking up on this to really soften that light. I want that light to feel like it's just flooding and overwhelming the trees, like it's an unstoppable force. So if anything, I want to go too light here, too light in value, that is. And then in here, you know, it becomes a little tricky to identify specific shapes of light and dark. So I think a little bit of experimentation is going to happen along in here. And this isn't about matching the reference one-to-one. It's about using the reference as kind of a launch pad. But that's kind of my take on it. You may be looking at this and require more detail, more precision. And that's what's exciting about drawing, is that, you know, we'll each have kind of a different threshold for that. I know some artists that will adapt the landscape wildly. They'll, you know, kind of start with the landscape being a rough kind of launching point, and then just kind of let the drawing or the painting emerge from there. And then some artists that do an amazing job, you know, really replicating that photograph or replicating the subject. All right, so. One thing that you can start to see then is, like, with these areas of dark, if those become shadows, I'm trying to think about where the lights are going to be relative to those shadow areas. I found myself kind of getting lost in just making marks, you know, pulling out the lighter marks, and then I run the risk of it no longer adhering to any sort of logic with regards to light and shadow. So I kind of need to pull myself back into focus and realize that what I'm doing when I'm lifting off these light areas is that's the light striking on the top of each of these larger tree forms, and then we have the shadow falling on the underside of that. So I just need to make sure that everything's kind of aligning properly. All right, thank you everybody. Hello from Russia and Germany. All right. Gracie is asking, Gracie Shack Art Streamer, question: do you use craft knives to sharpen the pencils? I use this box cutter right here, so it's just a straight up razor blade, and I need to change it out fairly frequently. The charcoal in particular will really dull the blade, and so one of the things I'm not quite as good at is changing that blade. And then what happens is the pencils start to break more easily. So, all right, so I'm going through, continuing to kind of erase out lights on the trees. And you can see that I drew a mark right in here, but that was a little bit too strong. I really need to just keep reminding myself just to kind of lift and press rather than draw, rather than make distinct marks. And I don't want to create lines of light. I want to create shapes. So if you're new, like I said, I'm here to answer any questions. Everybody else watching answers questions as well. We just like to kind of share our experiences. If you have a wildly different approach, or even a subtly different approach, I'd love to hear it. That's kind of what we're here to. I've learned a lot from working with you all, and so I like to keep that going. That's why we're drawing together. So I'll be bringing in the rubber erasers a little bit to provide a little bit more precision with some of these light areas as we continue to refine them. For now, again, kind of striking in one area, move into another. And then, with each time I kind of lay down the kneaded eraser, I'm kind of reshaping it. In part, what that does is it just allows the eraser to consume the charcoal that it's just absorbing. So I don't develop these large deposits of charcoal on the eraser. All right, but I'm kind of digging the play between light and shadow here. So let me go in through and revise this. So we're about an hour and a quarter in. Nail art is, how do you know what kind of pencils to use? That's a good question. I want to see if I can articulate it beyond the, I mean, I think ultimately what it comes down to is just, I kind of use what I feel like drawing that day. In this case, I felt like charcoal lends itself more to the that concept of creating abstract marks that I was talking about earlier, and then graphite. Graphite kind of lends itself to more precision, and I kind of want to just use the tooth of the paper and just kind of experiment with abstract mark making here, and I just felt like charcoal would kind of get me there a little bit more easily, and kind of give me more to play with in that way. So I think that's what it comes down to. So sometimes it's it's driven by the subject. If if there's a kind of maybe something that needs more kind of control, or you want to kind of embrace the silvery nature of graphite, and maybe that becomes the reason why you use graphite. Or if you want greater contrast, maybe you switch to charcoal. But one of the things I like to tell students is become aware of the strength that's inherent in the medium. And then throughout the process, try to extract as much power from that as you can. So, for example, like charcoal, there's an ability to control value. And it can really kind of lend itself to some interesting mark making and a variety there. And so I want to kind of lean in on that a little bit more and really kind of leverage that potential. I don't want to try to make charcoal do something that graphite does. I don't want to make graphite do something that charcoal does. And it's the same with oil painting, with watercolor, pastel. There's something that is inherent in that medium that really kind of makes it special, that gives it its power, and then that becomes part of the art making process if you can identify what that is. So with oil paints, for example, you can mix color in an interesting way. With pastels, you're mixing color in a very different way. With watercolor, you have the use of water versus oil in oil paints. And so I like to, again, kind of understand what those strengths are and use that as part of the process. So there's just some kind of loose thoughts around materials. So now as I'm going through, all I'm doing now in terms of creating detail is keeping that thinking going as I was going before. So earlier I was looking at these larger shapes of dark. Now I'm just looking at smaller shapes. So now that I have the larger shapes defined, I can target an area, a smaller area in the drawing. But fundamentally, I'm not doing anything different than what I was doing earlier. It's just at a smaller scale. So again, I'm still using the overhand grip here because I want to create really kind of abstract marks. Kind of, again, lean in on the texture of the paper, the tooth of the paper, help that suggest the foliage here. So as I'm doing this, there are kind of several things that I'm kind of paying attention to with the mark making. There's the pressure, and then there's kind of the angle, right? I'm kind of rocking it, and I'm also kind of rolling it, spinning it. And so if I lift it up, I kind of engage the tip a bit more. It gives me a little bit kind of a smaller, more defined mark. So I lay it down. It kind of feathers it out. And so part of it, what I'm looking at is what's happening on the page. Is it doing something that allows me to kind of connect with the subject? Does it make sense with the subject? And then adjusting from there. So I'm kind of trying to be light in this area because I know I want that to be a lighter value. Hello from Barbados, Wendy. All right, Gracie, thank you for watching. Arlene, wait. Oh, JC, I'm kind of curious to see how your drawing turns out, so I hope you share it. So again, if you're new, you can pinned at the top of the chat is a link to the individual episode page, and then following this episode, you'll see drawings from a lot of you. So I love to see those works, and some of you, you'll kind of post them in batches, which is totally fine. So when you go to the Drawing Together page on Artist Network, you'll find links to all 80 episodes, so sometimes I'll see kind of a wave of them come through from some of you as you kind of build up a portfolio of these drawings and then post them. Some of you will post them right away. So even if you're not drawing, if you're just kind of curious what everybody else is drawing, check that page out. All right, so what's kind of standing out for me right now is I need something to really serve as the anchor for this portion, and there's this massive tree that's kind of overhanging the cliff here, and that's going to be kind of my landmark. All the other trees are just kind of small and they kind of blend together, and then you have this kind of larger one. It seems to kind of stand out as a singular unit. So I want to give a little bit more attention to that, and I think hopefully that will give us something to kind of latch onto for that hillside, and that will kind of bring everything together. And one of the things I'm noticing too is that, with the light, we have the strongest light on this kind of the top ridge, and then it falls into shadow, and you get these little strips of light where the light's kind of catching as it just kind of rakes down that side. And I'll have to come back in and pull out those highlights, but I want to make sure I get first a main kind of understanding, main description of the play of light and shadow, that form there. So I'm going to drop this into shadow along in here. Lindy, I use gray tone paper. How can I make water look white? Are you talking about the, Lynn, you're asking a question. The white you're talking about, are you looking at the falling water here? If you're using toned paper, if there's a layer of charcoal or graphite underneath it, sometimes that white layer will just kind of mix with it and it'll create kind of a mud. So you may end up having to use your eraser to kind of lift that material off, get to the raw paper, and then lay your white on top of that. And I found that will often lead to kind of the stronger white if you need something that's stronger. So. Yeah, so if you're working on the toned paper, you need to have some sort of either white chalk or pastel to bring those value up in those areas. Otherwise, if you need to achieve that same level of contrast, you need to go darker with everything if you can, which is kind of a tricky thing. You just gonna need to key everything down. All right, let's see, right in here. So right in here, I'm really laying in the pressure. Trying not to break the pencil. I need to get that dark. So I'm just, with these, I'm seeing like this, those ferns kind of falling down there. And in order to achieve that, I'm kind of rocking the pencil, in this vertical motion. And it's helping to create these areas of light and dark that feel more natural and not kind of overly drawn. Really just trying to let the materials suggest then, rather than make explicit. So if I'm just trying to hold in my mind the major shape, light and dark, but then just kind of let the material kind of do its own thing a little bit. But it is this kind of rocking motion, so that there's kind of like a landing and a lift off kind of motion on the page. It's just happening all very quickly. And then rolling the pencil in my fingers so that I'm not working with a flat spot. I'm not developing flat spots on the pencil core. And then, so again, as I mentioned earlier, there's this kind of vertical directionality of the texture along that cliff wall. And then we confront this generally horizontal nature of the texture in the trees. So as I'm worked on in here, I'm running basically vertically, and as I come up into the tree area, I'm just going to switch and essentially make the same mark, but just in a horizontal nature. And then that contrast between horizontal and vertical should register in the viewer's mind. So we're not seeing, it's all one dark shape, but just those subtle differences in the direction of your marks can be enough for the viewer to be able to differentiate between those two planes. Let's see. So I come across here, I need to go a little bit darker. And I feel like I'm kind of fixating on this area a little bit too much. I might have to kind of move to another area and then come back to this. I'm kind of losing a sense of the whole at this point. So I think let me all right. And so then as I'm going to shift my focus to the edge here of that waterfall. And I think what really makes that work is this changing relationship along that edge, where it's a little bit lighter here and gradually getting darker. Actually, it's a little bit darker, we get lighter and then darker, and in here. So that play is really kind of critical in terms of opening up that space and making this side here feel like it's receding away. And gives a bit more form and volume to that edge. If I draw a hard line along there, for example, that's going to flatten everything out. And so I want to play with that edge variation a bit. So the way we use line is really interesting, because it can be sometimes we need to have a line to define an edge. And then sometimes we need to get rid of that line in order to suggest form, volume, space, and light, things like that. And so that's one of the reasons I like to start my drawing with an expression of the shape rather than line, because I'd rather build into that use of line than start with everything divided by lines and then try to get rid of that. It's just I've run into trouble in the past, so that's why I kind of move and kind of develop my drawings this way. All right, okay, what do I need to do here? I'm gonna kind of work back in this area now. I'm going to pull out this rubber eraser, and I think what I need to do is I need to pull out a little bit more light in this area. So now this is a rubber eraser that I've kind of carved into this wedge. And then it gives me a little bit more precision. And as I'm doing it, I'm trying to think about this. I'm using the eraser as a drawing tool. So the same types of things that I've been paying attention to, kind of rocking the pencil, kind of rolling it, or the eraser, I'm sorry, rocking and rolling it, playing around with pressure, dragging it and scraping it, all to try to simulate the light striking on the trees. And I'm targeting the lightest lights. So if we look in this light area here, there are going to be some areas where the light just feels stronger, and that's where I'm kind of targeting right now. There we go. That's feeling a little bit more. So what I'm looking at is I want to create this plane that recedes back like this. And so I'm trying to provide a transition from this spot to here, and looking for clues in the reference photo that might help get me there. And then again, I'm fighting that that urge to create like this regular kind of rolling, consistent mark, like some sort of pattern. So I'm intentionally just doing a few marks, moving on to another spot, and trying not to repeat that same mark over and over again. Then here, everything kind of tightens up a little bit. So I'm switching, I've got that kind of chisel tip in here. It will help me to create smaller marks. But again, now it's still trying to think abstractly about it. If I try to think about drawing an individual tree, I'm going to get lost and overwhelmed really easily. So I'm just trying to think shapes of light and shadow, direction of marks, things like that. Now I'm at that larger tree mass here. Again, just focusing on the lightest lights. Where is the light the strongest? And that will help to kind of pull out more form there. So I want these tree forms to feel three-dimensional. Right in here. Some of this is just kind of placing the eraser on the page and then just giving it a quick kind of vibration, right? And that's enough to lift off the material. But you'll never get back to that bright white, which is all right. We don't need that here. The lightest lights here are darker than the sky, so I don't have to worry about getting back to that white page here. The eraser can also be somewhat of an effective blending tool. So if you use it lightly, like right in here, I'm just kind of dragging, and it's really loading up the charcoal. And that can really kind of create some interesting marks. So I like to play around with that. And that might help to simulate the texture of the rock. So if I just let it kind of just glide across the surface, it's kind of blending and mixing, and it's going to do some kind of interesting abstract things. All right, back up to here. We talked about how this is all in shadow, but you get these little bits of light that catch as the light kind of rolls around the form. That's what I'm trying to suggest here. I'm going to come back up and I want to look at see if there's any questions, comments. I feel like I'm getting kind of absorbed in this. I've got that charcoal loaded up on this eraser, so I'm kind of curious to see if it's actually going to help to lay down some marks. Yeah, you can actually, because there's enough charcoal on the eraser, I can actually blend like I do with the blending stump. All right. How's everybody doing? Cheryl saying, sorry, you have a pit white pastel pencil. That sounds great. Greg, welcome. Well, I'm glad this is helping out. So, Shamin is asking, how do you layer charcoal and not get that streaky look? That's a good question. So, I don't know at what point you joined, and so you can watch this back if you need to. But what it's all about is building up layers as much as possible. I've got this paper towel in my hand that can then also kind of smudge things out, build up another layer, maybe use a blending stump and smudge it out, smooth it out, put on another layer, and then you just keep doing that. And if you find yourself getting streaks, so if I were to go like this, right, and you get those streaks there, then the next pass you would try to target those light areas, and so maybe kind of fill that in, fill that in, fill that in, and then kind of blend it out, and then you start to get rid of those streaks that way. So that's kind of the thinking there. But they will get streaks, and what happens, especially in the early stages of the drawing, when you start with a white piece of paper, any mark you make is going to really feel strong. But if you just keep at it, eventually you'll lose those streaks. So often what I found with students is that they give up a little bit too early. And if you just keep layering on, building it up, kind of wiping it down, building it up, wiping it down, eventually it'll kind of smooth out. You just kind of, what I've learned to do is just accept that in those early stages, those streaks are going to be there. And if I commit enough, then eventually they'll go away. They'll get kind of consumed in the drawing process. So hopefully that makes sense. So kind of shifting my thinking over here, again, looking at the darks, but now I'm refining it a little bit, looking at the smaller forms of light and dark. Now, essentially the same kind of mark making as I was doing over here. It's mostly vertical. It's just these short little vibrations that I'm giving this pencil. All right, thank you, everybody. Three-dimensional, awesome. Okay, Kablooey 59, I love it. As you may have noticed from the titles of my show, I really love the puns, the dad jokes. That makes it fun. So, Ani is saying, sorry I was late to join you. Question, how can you give depth with a pencil on the hill? So this is, it may be helpful to start the drawing from the beginning, and you can just kind of see how I started it. But really it's all a matter of really observing the change in value as you move from front to back, right? So if you get the main shape correct, and as you start to divide it up, really look for it changing as much as possible. It's going to flatten wherever it's consistent. So if I draw a solid value back in here, that whole space is going to be flat. It's going to come to the surface. The more change I give it, the more potential for depth. And so one of the things that makes this recede is that there's low contrast, and so that pushes back. The high contrast areas tend to project forward. So we get greater contrast here. So this pops forward, low contrast here pushes back. So that's kind of what I'm thinking there. So Justine, thank you for reminding me to be patient. That's a very, very important tool. Be patient and kind to yourselves. That's what I say here in this drawing. We do this every week. We're going to do a lot of drawings. If this is episode 80, I do a preparatory drawing for each one. And so I've done 160 drawings now as a result of this show. And that's all they mean. I'm not hanging them up. They don't have to be more or less than what they are. And what I found for some students, they really struggle with the desire to make each drawing precious, which I get. I mean, you are going to create work that is precious to you. But I think it's also helpful to free yourself from that expectation with each drawing and just just let it be what it is. And if it falls apart, it falls apart. Every drawing goes through the ugly duckling stage where you feel like you're just going to lose control of it and it's not going to look great. But if you keep at it, you're going to pull it together and the drawing's going to turn out great, or you're going to learn something from it. And either way, there's a positive there. So just remind yourself of that if you get frustrated. But I know the times when I was least satisfied or when I had the expectation that I need to create something that really worked, put that pressure on myself, and then you start to stress out, and that completely changes the mark making. So remember we said that in this show here, marks are thoughts. Each mark that we make starts as an electrical impulse in our brain and gets translated down our arm, through the hand, into the pencil, onto the page, and it becomes a representation of some sort of neural activity. So that I thoroughly believe that stress and anxiety will show up in the drawing, and that sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes our mood drives our drawing, sometimes the drawing drives our mood. So I'm evaluating the drawing right now. So I have the screen in front of me that shows what you're seeing right now, and that is equivalent to me setting it up vertically and looking at it from a distance. So it's different than how I'm seeing it on the table directly in front of me. So I'm just doing a quick evaluation, and I think what I need to do is refine this rock here. So there's some negative drawing that's going to happen where I'm focusing on the shape of the water around it. And it's generally darker than the rock. So I'm going to kind of work on this area and work my way up to the edge of the rock. And as I come up here, I'm trying not to be too heavy with the line. But I don't know, maybe a line, maybe an outline or a contour line will help to really project that forward. But I feel like that's working out all right. It's too light in value, too much contrast here. So I'm just going to use the paper towel to knock that down a little bit. I'm going to lose that edge. I'll just reestablish it. And then one of the things I'm observing about this rock is there's kind of a curvilinear aspect to it. But rather than focus on the curves, I'm going to try to identify the straight angles and try to get those and then round it out, rather than start it from a point of it being these rounded edges. Because then I run the risk of it just feeling like this kind of blobby thing. Straighter edges, I think, are more easy to accept. Oh, Cheryl, it's a good point. Don't forget to sign it and date it. I haven't dated any of these, but luckily I guess I have the recordings here that tell me when these were done. But that's a good point for all of you that as you're doing these, kind of track your progress a bit. And then drop this down in value. So as I drop this down, that'll help to pull that rock forward. That's what I'm thinking about here. So kind of creating a gradation in value through here. And then what I can do is use a blending stump to kind of indicate, kind of identify where the dark areas are going to go. There's this interesting shadow, this form here in the reference that I don't really know what that is, but I don't want that. I don't want the rock to be distracting. And it'll be distracting if it's not finished enough or if it's too finished. So I need to find that right balance. And maybe use the eraser to create a little bit more variety and along in here. And so some of the things that will flatten out the drawing, or if you have an edge that's too consistent, too even, so you want to try to vary that as much as possible. All right, so let's see, sometimes I also just make marks, and if I like the marks, I keep them, even if they don't really look like the reference photo. So I think that's kind of what's happening there. JC, that's a good comment. You had a teacher that said, said to remember it's just a piece of paper. Exactly. It's just paper, it's just material, you know, so, but I mean, we all have different motivations. You know, for some people, you know, like I tend to kind of collapse under that pressure. I don't perform well. Others do, and so, but I think kind of being aware of how you respond to that pressure is really important. So I think that's a good reminder that your teacher was giving you, that it is just a piece of paper. And that's interesting. I don't know quite where that comes from, that the desire to make the drawing so precious. All right, so I'm just kind of trying to pull out the highlights on the side here. I haven't really drawn the water yet. That's going to be the last thing. And I wish I had a better reason to kind of delay that gratification, other than the fact that I just felt like it. So, I mean, if you kind of finished the water earlier, that's totally cool. All right, so I'm kind of looking at the structure of that cliff face here, looking for where the light is really kind of striking it, what those planes are. And if you're not quite sure what it's going to do, just kind of start with a light pressure, kind of ease your way into it. So I've got like kind of the sharp point. Oh, I've got this mono zero eraser. Now, one of the things I found is that this Tombow gives you more precision. Greg, you're the one that kind of encouraged me to get this thing, and I love it. But I do find that it lifts a little less material than this Derwent, this larger one. So I kind of use them interchangeably, and I found that if I chisel this to a sharp point, it gets me some more control. So what I often do is sometimes kind of start with the Tombow, and then if I need to lift more material, I come in with the bigger one. So that's what I'm gonna do here. I've got this kind of tripod grip, and I'm just gonna draw with this mono zero eraser. And I do find that it's a little bit forgiving, so you can kind of test an area a little bit more if I'm looking at this area, for example, and I want to erase out a tree branch that's kind of catching the light. It doesn't immediately pull up the material. I can kind of ease my way into it, which is really helpful. And then I can kind of lean in on it when I need to pull more material. And if it's not enough, like I said, I can come in with the Derwent here. So now we're just really suggesting, I mean, texture is all about light. So we're suggesting texture right here. And the way we convey texture is by really studying the contrast, the sharpness of the light areas relative to the dark. So something that's highly reflective, for example, will have a really sharp edge. Something that's more matte will have a diffused kind of transition from light into shadow. That highlight will be much more diffused. And then when you look at something like this, you can kind of see kind of a global kind of light form. As we observed here, there's a big play of light and shadow, but then there's also kind of the small play, you know, how intense the reflections are off each of those leaves. And so those are kind of some of the things you start to think about and observe. But if you're not quite sure, prioritize kind of the global value. Get the main structure right. Before you get consumed by the finer details. So I think we're almost to the point where we can call the kind of the land area done, or close enough, and then we can move on to the waterfall area. And so with this, if you've kind of changed the angle of your eraser, you can kind of blend a little bit if you use like a light pressure, and then kind of start to lean in on it. And, you know, this has really just been a bunch of quick marks, but, you know, it's been worked enough where it starts to suggest detail. And that's what really gets me excited. And again, this is, you know, if the main theme of this episode is to contemplate the nature of abstract marks in a representational work, that's really where I get most excited, is like when if you get up close to this, it's just abstraction. It's just kind of a mess of marks on the page. And then as you step back, it all comes together. Let me see here. I think I need a little bit more structure in here. And then what I'll do is, let's see, I'm going to finish this water. And I think what I'll do actually, maybe I'll call it out to you. What should I have really the falling water and I have the pool. What should I do next? I'll put that out there. I'll take a break and read the comments here because I'm excited. Cheryl saying you're going to try monochromatic watercolor. That's awesome. I don't know if you have a particular color that you're going to kind of build that off of. Thank you. All these good questions. Journal is perfect. Janelle's drawing a dragon. Awesome. Everybody is, yeah, I'm glad everybody's kind of supportive here. Greg is saying you definitely use your mono zero for foliage highlights. The chisel, I chiseled the point of the zero as well. Yeah, that's exactly what I've done here. Not necessarily intentionally, but just the nature of it working, you know, it kind of refines itself down to that sharp point. So, the two erasers that I'm using, the rubber erasers, I've got this Derwent retractable eraser that I really like, and I've used a razor blade to kind of chisel that down, and then this Tombow Mono Zero eraser, and of course my trusty Kneaded eraser. I do have this Derwent rubber eraser. This is a slim one. This does a great job of lifting material, but I don't know why I'm not using it. There's no real reason why, but I just decided not to. Sometimes I just get in the flow and I don't think about it, but let's see. Shamin is saying, as you use pencils with eraser leads are basically the opposite of what a pencil is. So, oh, interesting. So you use kind of a retractable eraser there. Kablooey 59, Prussian blue, goes from very light to very dark. Prussian blue is a great color. Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, let me see. Well, I'm not getting any suggestions here what to do next. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go for this pool of water first. And what am I feeling right now? Okay, so I'm going to use the blending stump. And again, thinking about the plane, I'm going to kind of prioritize kind of a horizontal motion with the material to contrast the vertical cliff face. So as I get close to that edge, I want to be careful over here to not create a dark halo. So if I need to, I can go right over that edge and then reestablish it with the eraser. And so I do a lot of overlapping like that, drawing an edge, kind of covering it over, then reestablishing it, and then just keep working that edge. Because I find that if I get too precious with that edge, I end up creating, it just gets kind of clunky along that edge, and it creates this halo that flattens things out. So I'm going to try to prioritize this horizontal direction. And now, as I don't know if it really kind of picks up, but you can see on here there's deposits of charcoal that are a little bit more heavy than other areas. So it's kind of smoothed out, like right in here, for example. So I'm just trying to be mindful of where that is. And I'm going to try to identify, use the darker part of that eraser in the darker areas, or the blending stump. And I love using this blending stump for water because we see the ripples, these darker and lighter lines, But if we draw them as lines, it can really fracture that plane. We want it to feel like it's a solid ground plane. And, or not, I guess not solid, a liquid ground plane, but that feels like it's one plane rather than a collection of marks. And so I really love the blending stump for that purpose, because it tends to create marks that feel more like these shadows. And they create these kind of tapered marks that reference water really nicely. So as I'm doing this, I'm trying to be mindful of kind of this horizontal plane, and I'm just kind of tapping and rolling the material, and it starts to suggest the water. But I'm trying to also observe the water and make sure I get the general shape, the pattern of light and dark right. And you can see, you can start to see kind of like this crisscrossing down in here. You get these ripples that overlap with one another. That's what but I really have found that this blending stump works great for creating the suggestion of water. And if you're using it and you feel like it's kind of running dry, you can kind of come back to a heavier area like this, load it up with charcoal. Again, I'm kind of rolling it so that I'm kind of depositing it more evenly, and then I can come on over here and start to lay in more. So there's a lot of just kind of tapping, kind of a light dragging. And then I'm going to come back in with the eraser to kind of erase out the highlights. But part of some of these tricks that I've learned for suggesting texture, part of what drives this approach is the fact that I get impatient. I used to be able to sit and draw for hours and hours and hours and hours, and now I love to get a drawing done in one shot. I love to get a painting done in one shot, and there's something about that spontaneity. And I'm really trying to overcome that in my own work, my own painting in particular, and revisiting and kind of really pushing the painting, going deeper and deeper each time I revisit the painting, because I tend to call it quits too early. So it's not always a good thing, but that impatience also has led me to discover new ways of using the material that get me to the end result more quickly, if that makes sense. So. I contemplate the nature of patience quite a bit when I'm working, because I used to get so jealous of the artists in class who, would just be hyper focused for hours and hours and hours on their drawings, and I'm like, I gotta get this done. I just need, after a couple hours, I wanted to be out and done, and move on to another one, and I'm just kind of a curious thing. I don't know how you all feel about that, or if you can kind of connect with those impulses, but yeah. Greg, we communicated a bit. Greg's got some work that really is time consuming, and there's something about that I very much admire. So. All right, so I feel like it's starting to come together. What I'm looking for now is that transition across here. So as we talked about reflections, in the water, because it's choppy, it's breaking up those reflections. So if you blur your vision, you look at it kind of globally, it's this soft transition from light to dark. If you hyper-focus on an individual wave, you see a sharp reflection though. And so you're trying to think both big and small at the same time. And it can be a challenge, but what I'm doing right now is kind of trying to step back and see what are the kind of the global reflections working? Is that general transition working across here? Because if I get that right, then again the viewer's mind will fill in kind of more of that information. All right, now this shadow under here is darker in general, so I'm going to drop in some value here. Trying to push some of the darker values even more. Brenda is saying, do you think that I would ever do an acrylic tutorial series? I have thought about it for sure. If you're itching for that though, check out the Painting Together series with Gigi Chen. So she did eight episodes with us. They were live just like this, but acrylic painting. So you'll find that in the on artistnetwork.com, and you also find it on our YouTube channel here. Oh, Cheryl saying ivory black, awesome. Let me see. I think that kind of hid that. Okay. Did you do Faber-Castell? Shamin's talking about the Faber-Castells eraser, and you can sharpen them to a normal. Oh, I know which ones you're talking about. They're actually like wood, they're kind of like wood pencils, but they have an eraser in the course. I've never actually used those. That's awesome. Thank you for mentioning those. All right, thank you everybody. All right. Well, Tammy, welcome. I'm glad you could join us. I know we're a little bit late, but it's all good. We can always watch this later if you need to. So I'm kind of just finishing up along the water here. And then I think what I need to do is I need to really push the value here to kind of suggest a little bit of light in there. And I feel like this is a little bit too dense, so I'm going to do really a light touch with the kneaded eraser in here to suggest kind of some bounce light in that shadow area. And now what I need to do is kind of suggest some light right in here where the highlight is strongest in the pool. I'm going to kind of erase out some of the lighter lights. There's a little bit of light along, a little bit of kind of these kind of bubbles along the shore. Never underestimate the power of just tapping in work. You know, just like in constellations, like we piece together, you know, we see a sequence of dots. It's the law of good continuation is what it's called. And we piece together those dots into a recognizable path. And so I like to use that in a drawing as well. So now I'm kind of building up from the bottom, looking at these lighter areas, and you know where the water is really kind of spilling into the field. And so kind of thinking about making them soft. I don't want to make these too sharp of an edge because that spray is really kind of filling that and catching in the light. So if anything, I want to prioritize a softness to all of these edges. All right, here's what I'm going to do. This is a little scary right now, but I think I need to do it to create a little bit more structure in these areas. I'm going to take my dirty paper towel, and I'm going to kind of wipe this down. And I'm kind of thinking about the general flow of the water. I'm not being too precise with it, but I need to knock down those values and soften those edges. And then I'm going to come back in here before I erase out those highlights. I'm going to add a little bit more kind of detail. So you can kind of start to see along this upper area these various layers. So with a really light touch, just these kind of vertical lines here that kind of represent those upper levels of the waterfall. And then, let's see. And then we get these dark lines that where the water separates along in here. And then we come across this angle here and then down. And the way I treat these edges is going to be really kind of critical because the water separates towards the bottom. So I'm going to use the tooth of the paper to suggest that spray. So it's really kind of a light kind of lift off. Use that tooth of the paper to represent the white spray there. So we're doing actually negative drawing. We're drawing the negative space, the shape around those white bubbles, the spray. But So this is really just utilizing the weight of the pencil to make these marks. And I want to kind of ease into it. If I need to go darker, I can. But I'd rather start too light and then need to go darker than start too dark and then try to erase out those lights right now. And then try to observe where the edges are sharper and where they're more diffuse. So like right in here, for example, it's a little bit sharper. And as we come down here, it's a fairly sharp edge. As we move down here, though, it becomes a bit more broken. It gets more broken up, more diffused. And so this, what I'm using my pinky to kind of stabilize things a little bit, kind of using this some kind of modified tripod grip, but I want to use the side of the pencil as much as possible. And if I need to, I can just kind of roll my hand into more of a tripod grip that really gets that tip of the pencil moving. And here. I've kind of lost the proportions over here, but that's all right. Something's off here, but I'm not all that worried about it. I think I have the whole feel of the waterfall correct, so I'm not going to worry about it. As we come down here, I'm just going to let that. I like that kind of sense of atmosphere there. And there's this kind of more, it's stronger, kind of dark right in here. And we're just about done here. I know you've all stuck with me for a while. It's another long one, but I'm feeling pretty good about it. All right. Just kind of tapping on here again to kind of unify everything, knock things down. There's some just kind of loose particles sitting on the top. Knock that down, and then I can come back in with the eraser and start to kind of clean things up a little bit, like sharpen off some light that kind of strikes in along, that catches along that level of the waterfall. And you can use these kind of longer kind of striations to help reinforce the direction of the water flow. But I think having, actually, I'm going to knock this down even more. I need a little bit more contrast in those lights. I need to be able to pull out highlights a little bit more clearly, like right in there. And so that's kind of the trick to painting water, painting snow, things that we identify these as white. It's that subtle contrast in those light values that really make this all come together. And so initially there was just too much white, so I had to knock that down, and then give myself a little bit of contrast to work in, and that brings that all to life. Like I said, it's kind of the same with snow. So much of painting snow is actually painting like a gray or blue, and then just having a few kind of key highlights that pull it all together. I think right in here, there's just kind of more of these drips that I want to indicate. Where it's a little bit thinner and you get these kind of strings of the water. So just kind of giving it just a gentle touch. playing around with both pushing and pulling, kind of dragging the pencil. But I think we're pretty much close. I think we're pretty much done here. I don't know how much else I could do that's really going to move the needle on this drawing. So I might call it quits. Or I know we're over 2 hours, so that's a long time. Thank you all for joining me here. I do want to take some time to check out the comments. If you need to go, we meet every Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern. I'm working on a still life for next week, so drawing some grapes. Haven't done that before as part of this series. It's been a while since we really worked on still life, so kind of shift our focus there. I think I'm going to work on the tone paper for that one, so we're going to work both charcoal and white charcoal. So that's where we're going to with that. I want to thank you all. I'm going to check out the comments. If there's any other questions, feel free to shout them out now. I'd love to have the opportunity to answer them. Don't forget to share your work. There's a link at the top of the chat or in the description below where you can share your work on the episode page. So love to see everybody's work. Glad to see you. Mary C., what a challenge. It's been fun. Excellent. I'm glad it was. Let's see. Tammy, Cynthia, awesome. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, Texas, you're below 30. That's got to be interesting there. Yeah. I know we're in the single digits. I think we're going to drop below 0 this weekend, so I'm not looking forward to that. All right. Thank you, everybody, for the comments. So I mean, I think you should give it a shot. You don't have the confidence to sharpen the pencils like this. I haven't used another pencil sharpener like that in so long. I have one of these guys right here that I use sometimes for graphite. I don't know if you can see that. This is a nice kind of Derwent thing that mounts to the table. I really like it. It makes a nice sharp point, but I kept finding it would break in the pencil sharpener, the charcoal would, and then I have to dig it out. So I only use that I've used that just for colored pencil when I work on that. So I found that I have to actually have a couple different pencil sharpeners, and as a result, I feel like it's easier to use a razor blade for the charcoal because it can break more easily. But so that's what that's all about. Let's see. JC is saying, have you considered going back and redoing some that that we thought particularly tough? Yes, I've done a few kind of repeat subjects, but I think that's a good point. We're at episode 80, so we've got a lot of them, but it would be fun to go back to some of those early ones and see how things have improved. Especially the self-portrait, I still kind of cringe at that one. That was a tough one, so I may give that another shot. All right. Oh, welcome Marcus from Northern Ireland. All right, well, it looks like everybody's here. I know if you're just joining us, I apologize, but we got to go. But you can watch the recording, and if you want to watch us live again, we meet every Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern. So, perfect. Thank you all. I'm going to sign off.